Mourn the victims of the mass murder in the Pulse Orlando nightclub. We must find out everything there is to find out about this savage Islamic extremist who perpetrated this worst mass shooting in American history. We have to also ponder the vulnerability, though, of our open society to these homegrown citizen jihadis. The community must be surveilled intensely, including social media. I apologize ahead of time to many. I love the Muslim community. I know so many people, but there must be increased surveillance. This person, this 29-year-old New York-born Omar Mateen, you have to check out his Facebook. You have to monitor the way the New York PD monitors the gangs and their social media. We have to do it to someone who has crossed the paths of the FBI, certainly. We have to surveil them. But we also have to ask ourselves the important question that nobody wants to ask. This killer says he was inspired by ISIS. He's born in the United States. He's known to the FBI and other law enforcement agencies, for goodness sake. The FBI questioned him. To me, the fact that he's questioned twice in 2013, again in 2014, for his suspected connections to, in the 2014 incident, a guy who became a suicide bomber, for goodness sake. There were other indications he was an Islamic extremist. His father's a nut job who claims to be the president of Afghanistan. He lives here in Florida. How in the world was this unstable animal able to purchase the arsenal that he used to slaughter all these innocent people? Why wasn't he on the terror watch list? And if he was, why weren't authorities alerted last week when he armed himself and set forth to commit mass murder? Let's go now to Senator Marco Rubio, former presidential contender. Of course, Florida Senator Marco Rubio, lately a contender for the Republican nomination for president, as you know. Senator, first of all, our deep condolences to you, your reaction when you got the news.
Well, unfortunately, it wasn't a terrible surprise given the fact that we know that homegrown violent extremism poses a threat to this country that we've never confronted. These are people that sometimes never even travel abroad. They get radicalized online by ISIS or some other group, and then they attack a soft target. Unfortunately, it happened here in Orlando, but it could have happened anywhere, and it may yet happen somewhere else in the future. The war on terror is real, and it visited Orlando last night.
What does the country do? What does the state of Florida do? How do we protect citizens against these self-starting, these spontaneous combustions inspired, quote unquote, by ISIS?
That's a great question, Harold. I think part of it is to understand the war on terror isn't over. I think it begins by defining it for what it is. This is terror. He wasn't crazy. He wasn't confused. He's a terrorist. He's a radical Islamic terrorist who took a warped view of his religion and thought it justified the killing of innocent people in a place like what we saw last night. So it requires efforts to take away the capability of these groups to inspire people online and ultimately to defeat them militarily and get the Islamic world to reject them ideologically. I think the rest of the community is doing what it needs to do, which is to provide support for those who have been impacted by this. The lines of people donating blood are 8 hours long, so I'm very proud of the way this community has responded.
The fact that the victims were gay, what import do you put to that? Does it add an aspect of hatred to the terror, or is it just a hatred of another sort?
Well, we'll learn more in the days to come. My common sense tells you we know what radical Islamists think about the West, and we know what they think about those whose sexual orientation is to be gay or lesbian. And so I'm sure it's a big element of this. I can't prove it right now, but I think the evidence will lead us there that it was, in addition, I think all terrorism is a hate crime, but this was a crime, or this was a terror event aimed specifically at a group of people, it appears, and it's wrong. They're Americans. We'll fight on their behalf. They have a right to live in peace and safety in this country.
Senator Marco Rubio nailing it on the head. All acts of terror are acts of hatred as well. The fact that he was able to get a legal gun after being interviewed 2 times in 2013 by the FBI and 1 time very stringently in 2014 and on the so-called radar of the FBI.
Well, and that's why the homegrown violent extremist is so difficult, because you're only prevented from getting a gun based on what you've done, not on what you are going to do. We can't predict the future. In this case, he wasn't adjudicated of anything. He was investigated. The FBI didn't find anything they could act on. They knew he had leanings, but they had no just cause under our laws to detain him and remove him or to take away his rights. So that's why the homegrown violent extremist is so difficult to deal with. These are people that they may be saying things on Facebook, but until they actually do something, you can't move in on them. And I think that carries over to our gun laws, unfortunately. But as I told everybody, it's terrible that he was able to get and use that, but if it wasn't a handgun, he could have used a pipe bomb, he could have used a car full of explosives. These terrorists are pretty determined to carry out their cause.
So the outlook going forward now with ISIS saying they need more of these kinds of attacks because we're closing in on them over there? I mean, we have to stuff them out. We have to snuff them out over there for sure. But will this be a period, do you feel, and you're so connected to the intelligence community, will this be a period of escalating violence?
Well, what they do with these kinds of, from what we know now, what they do is they publicize, like through Dabiq, their online magazine, they basically call on their followers around the world to conduct these kinds of attacks. This is exactly the kind of attack that they encourage. Massive attacks against soft targets in spectacular ways in areas like this where you, and this, I imagine that there are similar plots, similarly minded individuals throughout this country. The FBI has repeatedly told us they have hundreds of people in this country who they suspect of being potential homegrown violent extremists. So I'm sorry to say, but this probably won't be the last time we confront something like this in America.
Will this fuel Donald Trump's call for a temporary ban to Muslim immigration?
Well, I don't want to talk about the presidential campaign. I can tell you this individual, this monster, was born and raised in the United States of America. We don't even know he's ever traveled abroad. And in the 21st century, with the amount of hate that the Islamic State and others are able to put out online, you don't really need people to travel abroad to carry out an attack like this. You can radicalize them right here in Florida.
Senator Marco Rubio, thank you so much. Great.